Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. I just want to talk about the Pentagon and basically, not really the Pentagon. I shouldn't even be using the Pentagon because that encompasses everyone in the Pentagon. I mean, basically, I'm talking about UFOs and the Pentagon cover-up when really the reality is, a vast majority of people working in the Pentagon have no idea what's going on with UFOs and the extraterrestrial reality. I mean, that has to be the case. Otherwise, there would have been disclosure already. There would have been you can't have too many people knowing about this. It's a very small group within the Pentagon. So, it's really wrong for me to be saying that all the time because it lumps the entire Pentagon, the people that are protecting this country, the United States of America, from invasion and all other sorts of, basically protecting my ass. And here I always lump the Pentagon in as the main problem when it comes to UFO secrecy, when really it's not. There's a group within the Pentagon because we really don't know what it's called. I'm going by Majestic 12, MJ12. I mean, that's the one name that we do know that existed at one time, that there was a group like that called Majestic 12 formed in 1947. Whether they still call themselves that or not, we don't know, but we'll use that as a placeholder. MJ12. So MJ12, Majestic 12, right? I'm just going to say this. They're terrible at politics. They really are terrible. And basically, leading up to the election and into the election and after the election, the midterms, it was proven. And for one thing, we've talked about this multiple times before the election, actually, when the New York Times ran a piece on the Friday before Halloween in late October. When they ran an article basically saying that, trying to downplay the entire UAP situation, saying that most of the stuff is it's all balloons, clutter or Chinese spy drones. Even though they didn't really have an answer for the other 50% of unknowns, but they threw out sentences like and claims like. If we had more data, we'd be able to explain it. But we guarantee you it's not extraterrestrial, even though I don't know how they're going to make that guarantee, even though they have no idea what the other 50% is. So how could they make a claim that there's no such thing as how could they make a claim that there's they know for a fact that it's not extraterrestrial? That doesn't make any sense. And of course, as we know, the Wall Street Journal joined in the fun leading up to toward November 8th when they ran a couple of letters to the editor basically downplaying the entire UFO issue. And and it was sad. It was really sad. They actually had one person who was that was a former pilot, a retired for 40 some years. He was a former Air Force pilot, and he's basically was saying that he never saw one, and neither did any of the pilots that he knew over 40 some years. And then they had some other article in there about that basically it's drunks in rural bars that only see UFOs, right? And it was just so obvious. I mean, it wasn't just me calling it out. There were people who follow the UFO topic all over the country who noticed that all of a sudden there's some obvious effort going on by somebody within the Pentagon, basically contacting their New York Times and Wall Street journals and asking for favors. And it was funny because actually on the day of the election, on November 8th, right, the Wall Street Journal ran another letter to the editor, highlighted another letter to the editor, but this time it was the reverse. I think this was, to me, right, this could have been an effort to cover their tracks. I mean, they think everyone out there is dumb, right? That we can't see through. I mean, here's the problem with that. People who follow UFOs, people interested in the subject of UFOs and extraterrestrials, right? They're very smart. They pay attention to these things. This ain't the 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s. I mean, we're in the 2000s now, right? The way information travels, the way people are able to communicate with each other, right? You can't get away with this kind of activity. You can't try to make it look like that's really not what you were doing, when really that's what you were doing. But now they're trying to cover their tracks because here was a pro UFO, a pilot talking about UFOs in the Wall Street Journal, but it happened to come out on election day. And it was pointed out by some people on Twitter. It was an opinion that the headline is, "I saw a UFO and so did members of my flight crew." Okay, and you could look at this. It was written by a co-pilot. His name was Ralph Lowinger, and now this is you're going to get if you don't have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, you're not going to be able to read this. I don't have a subscription either. However, it's such a small little piece that you are able to read the whole thing. I mean, the whole thing isn't blocked off. The paywall doesn't block the whole. The paywall is unable to block this little piece off because it wasn't that long of a letter to the editor. But anyway, I'm just going to read this here quick. It says, another pilot, another opinion on UFOs. The obvious rebuttal to Art Sabosky's "A Pilot Explains UFOs" for the last time. So UFOs don't exist because you and your friends have never seen one? I know they exist because I was the co-pilot of a Pan-American cargo flight with 5 crew members who clearly saw their formation. It was on a crystal clear, moonless night over Nova Scotia's south coast, and we all watched and saw the same thing through different panes of cockpit glass. Their dance was from another world. It lasted 5 minutes and terminated with the most dazzling feat of aerodynamics we had ever seen. I have now retired to the largest fly-in community in the world, in which many highly trained observers know that UFOs are real, cataracts and floaters aside. So there you go. So I thought it was nice that the Wall Street Journal put this letter to the editor to basically rebut that other letter from Art Sabosky from right before Halloween there, saying nobody he knows ever saw a UFO. I never saw one, so they don't exist as far as I'm concerned. All right, so now we have another pilot that had that. But it was interesting that the Wall Street Journal came out and with this, it's almost like to make it look like, no, we weren't. There was no effort by the Pentagon, or we weren't working with the Pentagon to try to cover this up, right? Or try to downplay UFOs. Yeah, see, we're fair, and you know what? Wall Street Journal leading up to that election, and the New York Times, it seemed like they were fair. Right, that they were being fair, but all of a sudden, like right before the election, it felt like things were getting downplayed. Right before this, that report was supposed to be released on October 31st, and as far as I know, it's not. It still hasn't been released. Not the public version, not the declassified public version. That's not been released yet. It was supposed to come out on October 31st. Right, right now it's November 10th. Again, it could have came out while I'm sitting here doing this podcast, or maybe it will come out tomorrow. I don't know, right? But, what's the holdup? I mean, what's going on? So for some reason, right before that report was supposed to be released, all of a sudden there's this big downplaying. There's nothing to it. There's nothing to it. Right? And now all of a sudden, everyone noticed that, like people like me. Well, of course, I'm just a small potato here. I'm a small fry when it comes. I mean, I don't have a big gigantic following like some of these other people that called it out, but I was one of the people that called it out. And there was there was an article in The Hill that I talked about recently that called it out. That article I talked about in a recent podcast, pro and anti-UFO factions in government. It wouldn't be the first time. That was an opinion piece written by Marek von Reinenkampf. And I came across, there's a blog, which is pretty cool. I'll leave a link for this article too. It's UAP News Center. And there was an article in there talking about UFO disclosure that basically this is saying that the mainstream media is taking a step forward. But the article does point out how the New York Times basically took a step backward. I'm going to read a little piece from this regarding the New York Times. It says the New York Times is the strong recent dissenter among the mainstream media. In late October, the Times released an article, "Many military UFO reports are just foreign spying or airborne trash." This reporting on the upcoming UFO report to be released to Congress highlights the list of UFO encounters in the report as having explainable sources. This does not seem to be a credible stance in light of the multiple sensory inputs available for these military sightings. This is also in direct contrast to the stance and apparent beliefs of congressional members who are actively pursuing the topic of UFO disclosure. It is worth noting that many members of Congress have been privy to briefings in which they received a great deal of classified information on the topic that the New York Times may not have. Still, the Times chooses to attempt to discredit the UFO reports? Why? Here's one speculative way to understand the New York Times whitewashing of the UFO phenomenon. Some believe that there is a battle going on right now within the government and the military as to whether or not disclosure should occur at all. This is covered by The Hill here. Well, they have a link to that Hill article that I was talking about. Anyway, continuing. It would be reasonable to believe that the New York Times is aligned with sources within the government that are anti-UFO disclosure, accounting for this article. After all, it was the famous 2017 New York Times article that brought the world into the current era of heightened UFO awareness and focus on disclosure. This makes one suspect that, barring outside influence, the Times would wish to progress that now famous storyline. The New York Times serves another purpose. It illustrates the inversion of media credibility on the UFO topic that I have written about previously. In short, for whatever hierarchy of credibility you wish to assign to news outlets on the UFO topic, that credibility hierarchy is inverted. Here we see the bluest of blue bloods, the New York Times, trailing the rest of the mainstream pack on the UFO topic, just as the inverted credibility hypothesis would suggest. Perhaps the forces brought to bear on the Times to disavow the reality of the UFO phenomenon are great. It seems increasingly apparent that the new National Defense Authorization Act language promoting openness on the UFO topic will bring UFO disclosure in the relatively near future, which would discredit the stance by the Times. Now, I'm just going to stop there. This is a pretty good site, and this is a pretty good article. It's very long. I will leave the link for it if you want to check it out. This is a good website for people who are interested in the UFO topic. But yeah, this is... To me, that's what it was. I mean, somebody contacted the New York Times and said, we want to downplay this, and we want you to run this article, and, you know, however it was accomplished, I don't know. I mean, but that's what it was. I mean, that's somebody from within the Pentagon, within Majestic 12, contacted the New York Times, contacted that reporter in the New York Times, and they ran that article basically downplaying this whole UFO thing right before the report was supposed to come out. And basically right before this election, for whatever reason, they don't want this to come out. And there is a group within Majestic 12 that doesn't want this to come out, obviously. I mean, it's obvious. And they obviously, somebody had contacted the Wall Street Journal and done this too, right? And then, of course, everyone who follows UFOs and some other mainstream outlets pointed this out, called it out. The Hill called it out. This guy here, who's the UAP Reporting Center, points it out. I mean, there's a lot of people all over the internet, on Twitter, people all over Twitter, people in Reddit. I mean, it was so obvious of a ploy. I mean, you could see it. You could see right through it. I mean, this isn't the, you know what I mean, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, when it was just newspapers, where the only way you could communicate was via newspapers, and, and the newspapers had the final say on what gets put out to the public and what doesn't get put out to the public. Yes, back then you could cover things up like that, or you can make something look like there's nothing to it and get away with it, but you can't do that anymore. I mean, Pandora's box was already opened. In 2017, when Lou Elizondo came out of the shadows, when those videos were leaked, right? It's too late. It's out of the box. There's too many people now. If you look at the polls, everyone thinks that there's a cover up, right? That the government's covering this up, and yeah, they are covering it up, and there are people that, and we know that you're holding that group within the Pentagon, not the whole Pentagon in itself, right? But that group within the Pentagon, Majestic 12. They're most certainly sitting on this. But look, here's what happened here. Leading up to the release of that report, they dipped their toe into some politics here. And they're not good at it. They're just not good at it. I mean, it's just too obvious. And the other problem that they have here is that this isn't a partisan thing, right? There's people on the right and the left that want UFO disclosure. It doesn't matter, right? You look at the polling, right? Look at the polling of the people that has nothing to do with that. So you're not going to be able to. It's just not going to happen. I mean, the only partisan people that wouldn't want this out are people who are debunkers and stuff like that. Maybe that would affect their livelihood. I don't know, but I don't think there's that many of those. Right, there are people out there that don't want the truth of this to come out, but I mean, the truth needs to come out. But this was just too obvious. This was too obvious of a ploy. You could see right through it. You could see that they were definitely, most certainly, cashing in some favors with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Hey, we want you to downplay this. I don't know how they accomplished it, but I'm sure that there was some contacts made, and we want to run this story here. We need to downplay this. This is getting out of hand. I just think it's a it was just so obvious. And now, like, it looks like they're turning tail a little bit. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, on the day of the election, November 8th, that new letter to the editor comes out rebutting the other letter from the other pilot, and they highlight that. I mean, they could have buried it, but no, it shows up all over, showing up on, you're doing a search on UFOs on Google, and that's one of the first thing that pops up all of a sudden, this Wall Street Journal, the latest Wall Street Journal letter to the editor on UFOs. Because they wanted to get that out there to show that, no, we're not trying to interfere. We're not trying to interfere. They're trying to trick everyone to think that, no, that's not, we're not trying to pull back or anything, So they're going to have to do it a different way if they want to try to do it, but they might as well just not try to do it and they might have just disclosed. I mean, what's the point? What's the point in this sitting on this continually? It doesn't make any sense. Let everyone know the truth already. Stop playing these games. You're not good at, whoever is on Majestic 12's board, you're not good at politics. You're just not. That's an unelected, I'm certain that everybody who's on that Majestic 12 board, everyone who's in charge, I'm sure they're all unelected positions, okay? So you have no idea what you're doing. You're not a politician. So, and when you tried to pull this stunt, it just was so obvious to everyone out there, and now you're getting called out for it. And that's what happened. MJ12 got busted. You're just bad at politics, period.